Zexthul adjusted the recording device attached to his neck and waited for the briefing to begin. The Galactic Council's Intelligence Division had called him here for another assignment. After 23 years of documenting wars across the galaxy, he thought he had seen everything. The meeting room was cold and sterile, just like all government buildings. Commander Villana entered carrying a datapad and sat across from him. Her forearms moved in the formal greeting pattern of their species. "Zexthul of the Documentation Collective," she said. "We have a new assignment for you." He nodded. "What species this time?" "The Krexani are having border disputes again?" "No, this is different. We have discovered a new species. They call themselves humans." Zexthul made a note on his pad. New species were always interesting to document. "What kind of conflict are they involved in?" Commander Villana activated a holographic display. A star system appeared in the air between them. The Kepler 442 system. Humans have established colonies there. The Screed Hive fleet is trying to claim the same territory. Our peacekeeping forces are trying to stop the fighting. Standard territorial dispute, Zexthul said. He had covered dozens of these. What makes this special? The humans refuse to follow normal war protocols. They won't accept mediation. They won't surrender when they should. Command wants to understand their military capabilities. Zexthul looked at the star chart. 3 different species fighting over one system. It happened all the time. How long has the conflict been going on? 8 months. Usually these things end in 6 weeks. That was unusual, but not unheard of. Some species were more stubborn than others. What do we know about human military technology? Commander Villana touched her datapad. New images appeared. Their ships are primitive compared to ours. Their weapons are basic energy and projectile systems, nothing we haven't seen before. So why are they still fighting? That's what we want you to find out. Zexthul studied the images. Human ships looked rough and simple. Their weapons seemed outdated. Their soldiers wore basic armor. Nothing about them looked threatening. "I'll need transport to the system and documentation equipment," he said. "Already arranged. You leave tomorrow." The commander stood up. "Zexthul, this assignment might be different from your others. These humans, they fight in ways we don't understand. Be careful." He waved a dismissive hand. "Commander, I've documented the ritual duels of the Krexani where they fight with honor swords until first blood. I've watched the Mindari conduct entire battles through telepathic warfare. I've seen the Zephyrian swarms move like one giant organism. How different can humans be?" The next day, Zexthul boarded a transport ship to Kepler 442. During the 3-day journey, he reviewed his notes on previous assignments. War was always the same, no matter which species fought it. There were rules. There were limits. Civilized beings understood when to stop fighting. The Krexani fought for honor, but they stopped when honor was satisfied. The Mindari fought for territory, but they accepted defeat when losses became too high. The Zephyrians fought for resources, but they retreated when the cost exceeded the benefit. Every intelligent species in the galaxy understood the basic rules of warfare. You fought until victory was impossible or too expensive. Then you surrendered and negotiated. It kept wars short and casualties low. Zexthul expected humans to follow the same patterns. The transport ship dropped him off at Kepler Station, a neutral outpost on the edge of the system. Captain Mordan, a fellow Veltari, met him at the docking bay. "Welcome to the strangest war I've ever seen," Captain Mordan said. "What do you mean?" "Follow me. I'll show you." They walked to the station's observation deck. Through the large windows, Zexthul could see the 3rd planet in the system. Even from this distance, he could see flashes of light on the surface. "That's New Harvest," Captain Mordan said. "Human agricultural colony. 2.3 million civilians. The Screed attacked it 6 months ago. Why haven't the humans evacuated?" "They say they won't leave." Zexthul watched another flash of light on the planet's surface. "What's their strategic value? What are they protecting?" "Farmland. Farmland." Zexthul couldn't hide his surprise. "They're fighting over farmland?" "Gets better. The Screed have 10 times more ships. The humans are completely outnumbered. Any other species would have surrendered by now." "Maybe they don't understand the odds." Captain Mordan laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Oh, they understand. I've listened to their communications. They know exactly how bad their situation is. They just don't care." That made no sense to Zexthul. Every species cares about survival, not these humans. "I've been monitoring this conflict for months. I've never seen anything like it, a communication alert sounded. Captain Morden checked his device. Perfect timing, he said. A human ship is requesting permission to dock. You can meet them yourself. 20 minutes later, Zexthul stood in the docking bay as a battered human ship connected to the station. The ship looked like it had been in many battles. Burn marks covered its hull. Several sections had been welded back together. 3 humans emerged from the ship. They wore simple uniforms and carried basic equipment. They looked tired but alert. The leader, a female with short dark hair, approached Captain Morden. Captain Sarah Chen, Colonial Defense Forces, she said. We need medical supplies and ammunition. I can provide medical supplies, Captain Morden replied. But you know our rules about weapons. Then just the medical supplies. Thank you, Zexthul stepped forward. Captain Chen, I'm Zexthul, a journalist with the Galactic Documentation Collective. I'm here to report on the conflict. May I ask you some questions? Captain Chen looked at him with sharp blue eyes. What do you want to know? Why are your people still fighting? The tactical situation seems difficult. Difficult? Captain Chen almost smiled. You could say that. Then why not accept mediation? The Galactic Council could help negotiate a settlement. With who? The Screet? Yes. Most territorial disputes can be resolved through negotiation. Captain Chen was quiet for a moment. Mr. Zexthul, the Screet don't want to negotiate. They want to eat us. Eat you? The Screet are a hive species. They consume other biological matter to grow their population. If we surrender, they will process every human on New Harvest into food. Zexthul felt confused. But surely some arrangement could be made. What arrangement? They see us as food. We see survival as non-negotiable. There's nothing to discuss. Most conflicts have some middle ground. Captain Chen picked up her equipment. Mr. Zexthul, let me ask you something. If someone wanted to eat your family, would you look for middle ground? She walked back to her ship without waiting for an answer. Zexthul stood in the docking bay thinking about her words. He had covered wars between species with different values, different goals, different methods. But he had never covered a war where one side saw the other as food. Still think they're like other species? Captain Morden asked. It's just a different motivation, Zexthul said. Once I understand their culture, I'll be able to document their warfare like any other. Captain Morden looked out the window at the flashes of light on New Harvest. Maybe. But Zexthul, I've been watching this war for months. These humans, they don't fight like anyone else. They don't think like anyone else. How so? Other species fight to win. Humans fight like they've already died, and winning is just a bonus. Zexthul activated his recording device. This assignment was becoming more interesting than he had expected. But he was confident that once he observed human warfare directly, he would understand it. After all, war was war. Every species followed the same basic patterns. How different could humans really be? Zexthul descended to New Harvest in a stealth shuttle. His recording equipment was hidden beneath synthetic skin that made him look like a tall, thin human. The Galactic Council's technology was very good at creating disguises. The shuttle landed in a field outside the main colony. Smoke rose from several buildings in the distance. The air smelled of burning metal and something else he couldn't identify. A human soldier met him at the landing site. The man was young, maybe 25 standard years. His uniform was dirty and patched in several places. He carried a weapon that looked like it had been repaired many times. You the war correspondent? The soldier asked. Yes. Zexthul from Galactic News Network. I'm Private Rodriguez. Colonel Martinez wants to see you before you start observing. They walked toward the colony. Zexthul saw his first sign that this war was different from others he had covered. There were no battle lines. No clear front or rear areas. Humans had turned every building into a fighting position. Children as young as 10 years old carried ammunition to soldiers. Elderly humans operated communication equipment. Even wounded soldiers who could barely walk continued to perform duties. Where are your non-combatants? Zexthul asked. Private Rodriguez looked confused. Are what? Non-combatants. Civilians who don't fight. Oh, we don't really have those anymore. Everyone does something to help. They reached the colony's command center, which was built into the basement of what used to be a school. Colonel Martinez was a woman in her 40s with gray hair and tired eyes. Maps covered every wall marked with symbols Zexthul didn't recognize. Mr. Zexthul, she said, welcome to New Harvest. I understand you want to document our war. Yes, I'm particularly interested in your tactical methods. Colonel Martinez pointed to one of the maps. The Screed attack in waves. They send thousands of drones first, then follow with larger ships. Standard hive tactics. How do you defend against such numbers? We don't defend. We make them pay for every meter. Zexthal made notes. When do you expect to receive reinforcements? We don't. I'm sorry. No reinforcements are coming. The nearest human fleet is defending 3 other systems. We're on our own. Then what's your plan for victory? Colonel Martinez looked at him strangely. Victory? Our plan is to make the Screed remember this place. To make them think twice before attacking humans again. Before Zexthal could ask what she meant, alarms started ringing. Red lights flashed throughout the command center. Incoming Screed wave, someone announced. Estimated 4,000 drones, 20 capital ships. How many defenders do you have? Zexthal asked. About 800 combat-ready troops, Colonel Martinez said. Plus maybe 2,000 civilians with basic training. That's impossible odds. Yes, standard Tuesday for us. She picked up her weapon. You want to see human warfare? Come on. Zexthal followed the colonel to the surface. The sky was full of Screed ships, black dots moving like insects. Human defenders took positions behind barricades made from overturned vehicles, furniture, and anything else they could find. The first thing that surprised Zexthal was the noise. Human weapons were much louder than he expected. The second thing was how the humans used them. They didn't fire in organized volleys like other species. They fired constantly, creating walls of projectiles. But the third thing was what really shocked him. A Screed drone crashed into a human position, crushing 2 soldiers. Instead of retreating, the remaining humans swarmed over the wreckage. They pulled out pieces of Screed technology and immediately started connecting them to their own weapons. What are they doing? Zexthal asked Colonel Martinez, upgrading. Screed energy weapons are better than ours, so we take them. During combat, best time. The parts are still warm. Zexthal watched a human engineer connect a Screed power cell to a human rifle. The weapon began glowing with green energy instead of firing simple bullets. The engineer tested it once, then handed it to another soldier. How do they know how to do that? They don't. They figure it out. Another Screed ship landed near them. It was much larger than the drones, maybe 50 meters long. Screed soldiers poured out of it, moving in perfect formation. They were 2 meters tall with 6 legs and natural armor plating. The humans did something Zexthal had never seen before. Instead of falling back or taking defensive positions, they charged. Not all of them. Not in formation. Individual humans simply stood up and ran toward the Screed ship, firing as they moved. They had no coordination, no plan that Zexthal could see. But it worked. The Screed had evolved to fight organized enemies. They couldn't predict what individual humans would do next because the humans weren't following any tactical doctrine. One human threw rocks. Another used a farming tool as a weapon. A third crawled under the ship and started hitting it with a hammer. Why don't they coordinate their attacks? Zexthal asked. They do, just not the way you think. Colonel Martinez pointed to a human who was painting symbols on buildings. He's marking Screed weak points. She's calling out enemy positions. That one is directing fire. Zexthal looked closer. The humans were coordinating, but not through formal commands. They communicated through hand signals, painted marks, even by throwing objects in specific directions. They adapt their communication methods during battle. They adapt everything during battle. An explosion shook the ground. One of the human positions had been destroyed by Screed plasma fire. Zexthal expected the humans to mourn their dead, or at least pause to reorganize. Instead, they immediately stripped useful equipment from the bodies and continued fighting. One soldier took ammunition. Another took a radio. A third took the dead soldier's boots because his own were worn out. Don't they honor their fallen? Zexthal asked. We honor them by not wasting anything they died to protect. The battle continued for 6 hours. Zexthal watched humans do things that violated every rule of warfare he knew. They used children to carry messages through sewers. They turned household chemicals into explosives. They built weapons out of farming equipment. Most disturbing was their attitude toward casualties. In every other war Zexthal had covered, armies retreated when they lost 15% of their forces. It was the galactic standard for when fighting became too costly. The humans passed 15% losses in the first hour. They kept fighting. They passed 25%. Still fighting. They passed 30%. Not only fighting, but learning. They studied Screet tactics during combat and developed counters immediately. When the Screet finally retreated, the humans had lost almost half their forces. By any galactic standard, they had been completely defeated. But the Screet had lost more ships than they had in any previous battle. And the humans had captured enough technology to upgrade their remaining weapons significantly. "We won," Colonel Martinez said. "You lost nearly half your people. But we're still here, and tomorrow will be harder to kill." That night, Zexthal sat in his assigned quarters and tried to write his report. He kept stopping to replay recordings of the battle. Human behavior made no sense according to any military theory he knew. They fought without discipline, but achieved coordinated results. They suffered massive casualties but considered themselves victorious. They used primitive weapons but found ways to improve them during combat. Most troubling was their attitude toward death. Other species fought to avoid casualties. Humans fought as if casualties were just another resource to be managed. Zexthal had documented many wars, but he had never seen soldiers who seemed more dangerous after being defeated than before the battle started. He fell asleep wondering what humans were like when they were actually winning. Outside his window, human engineers worked through the night, building new weapons from the wreckage of the day's battle. They sang while they worked, songs about standing together and never giving up. Zexthal's recording equipment caught every word. The next morning, scouts reported that the Screet were massing for another attack, but this time they were bringing twice as many ships. Colonel Martinez smiled when she heard the news. "Good," she said. "More equipment for us to capture." 3 weeks later, Zexthal found himself aboard the UES Persistence, a human warship that looked like it had been built from spare parts. The ship was supposed to be a simple transport vessel, but the humans had modified it into something else entirely. Captain Sarah Chen, the same woman he had met at the space station, gave him a tour of the ship. What he saw made him question everything he thought he knew about space warfare. "This used to be a cargo hauler," Captain Chen explained as they walked through corridors lined with weapons that definitely hadn't been there originally. "We've made some improvements. These weapons, where did you get them?" "Built them. Traded for some. Stole a few." She said this as if it was completely normal. "Stole them from the Screet. They left some ships behind after their last attack. We took what we needed." Zexthal stopped walking. "You salvaged enemy technology during battle?" "Not just salvaged. Improved it. They entered what used to be the ship's cargo bay. It was now filled with equipment that hurt Zexthal's eyes to look at. Screet biotechnology had been connected to human electronics in ways that seemed impossible. "This is Dr. Kim," Captain Chen said, introducing a human woman who was working on a device that pulsed with organic light. "She's our science officer. What are you building?" Zexthal asked. Dr. Kim looked up from her work. Her hands were stained with fluids he couldn't identify. "Communication disruptor. The Screet use biological signals to coordinate their hive mind. We're learning to jam them." "How did you learn to work with Screet technology?" "Trial and error. Mostly error at first." She pointed to several burn marks on the walls. "But we're getting better." "How long have you been studying their technology?" "Since yesterday." Zexthal's recording device almost fell from his hands. "Yesterday? We captured a Screet communication node during the last battle. Took us about 6 hours to figure out how it worked. Another 4 to start modifying it. This was impossible. Screet biotechnology was based on principles that took most species years to understand." "Don't you need time to study it properly?" Dr. Kim and Captain Chen looked at each other and laughed. "Time is something we don't have," Dr. Kim said. "So we learn fast or we die. But what if you make mistakes? Then we fix them. Or we explode. Either way, we learn something." Captain Chen led him to the bridge. It was cramped and filled with displays showing information in at least 4 different languages. Human crew members worked alongside captured Screet equipment that had been rewired to serve human purposes. "Status report," Captain Chen ordered as they entered. "Screet fleet is moving into position," her first officer reported. "Looks like they're trying something new." "Show me." The main screen displayed the Screet formation. Instead of their usual direct assault pattern, they were spreading out in a wide circle around New Harvest. "They're trying to surround the planet," Zexthal observed. "Looks like it," Captain Chen agreed. "What do you think they're planning?" Her question was directed at a human teenager who couldn't have been more than 17 years old. He was wearing a uniform that marked him as an ensign, the lowest officer rank. Probably a siege, the young man said. Cut off supplies and wait for us to surrender. Good analysis. How do we counter it? We don't let them complete the circle. How? The ensign thought for a moment. We could use the communication disruptor to confuse their coordination. Make them think some of their ships are enemies. Zexthal was shocked. This was strategic planning at a level that most species required years of training to achieve. How old is he? 17, Captain Chen said. He's been in 3 battles. Started as a maintenance worker, but he's good at seeing patterns. You promote people based on performance in battle? We promote people based on who keeps us alive. The plan they developed was insane by any military standard Zexthal knew. Instead of trying to break out of the Screet encirclement, they would let it form. Then they would use captured Screet technology to turn the enemy ships against each other. It required perfect timing, detailed knowledge of Screet psychology and technology they had only learned to use the day before. What if it doesn't work? Zexthal asked. Then we try something else, Captain Chen said. What if there's no time to try something else? Then we die fighting instead of die surrendering. The battle began 6 hours later. Zexthal watched from the bridge as the Screet completed their encirclement. Hundreds of ships surrounded New Harvest in a perfect sphere. Now, Captain Chen ordered. Dr. Kim activated her communication disruptor. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The Screet fleet began firing on itself. How is this possible? Zexthal asked. Screet hive mind relies on chemical signals, Dr. Kim explained while adjusting her controls. We're broadcasting false signals that make them think some of their own ships are infected with parasites. But they're intelligent beings. Surely they can overcome simple confusion. Individual Screet are intelligent, but they've been part of a hive mind for so long that they can't function independently. Take away their collective consciousness and they panic. Zexthal watched Screet ships destroy each other, while human vessels moved between them like wolves among sheep. The humans didn't just attack randomly. They studied which ships were most confused and targeted them first. They learned Screet panic responses in real time and used them to predict enemy movements. Most disturbing was how they used Screet psychological warfare against the Screet themselves. Broadcasting. On all Screet frequencies, the communications officer announced. What are you broadcasting? Zexthal asked. Recordings of Screet death screams, Captain Chen said calmly. It triggers their fear response. That's psychological torture. That's war. But surely there are rules. What rules? Did anyone give us a rule book when the Screet started trying to eat our families? The battle lasted only 2 hours, but Zexthal felt like he aged years watching it. The humans didn't just defeat the Screet fleet. They dismantled it systematically, studying each enemy reaction and developing new tactics to exploit it. When it was over, nearly half the Screet ships had been destroyed or captured. The survivors fled the system. We did it, the young ensign said. No, Captain Chen corrected. We learned. Next time they'll try something different, and we'll be ready for that too. Zexthal realized she was right. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They had used the battle to understand their enemy better. Every conflict taught them something new about Screet psychology, technology, and tactics. How do you process so much information so quickly? He asked Dr. Kim. We have to. Other species can afford to study enemies for years before fighting them. We don't have that luxury. So we learn during combat or we die. But what if you're wrong? Then we adapt. Humans are very good at adapting. That night, Zexthal tried again to write his report, but every time he described human tactics, they sounded insane. No species fought like this. No species learned this quickly. No species treated war as a real-time educational experience. He looked at his notes from previous assignments. The Krexani followed honor codes that hadn't changed in 1,000 years. The Mindari used the same psychic techniques their ancestors had developed. The Zephyrians maintained the same swarm patterns they had evolved millions of years ago. But humans changed their tactics during individual battles. They learned from every mistake immediately. They turned their enemies' strengths against them by understanding them better than the enemies understood themselves. Zexthal was beginning to realize that humans didn't just fight wars. They evolved during them, and they were very good at evolving. A message appeared on his communication device. Command wanted a status update on his investigation. They specifically wanted to know about human military capabilities and how long the conflict might last. Zexthul stared at the message for a long time before responding. Human military capabilities continue to grow during combat, he wrote. Conflict duration impossible to predict because humans treat each battle as training for the next one. Recommend continued observation. He didn't mention his growing fear that humans might be the most dangerous species he had ever encountered, and he definitely didn't mention that they were getting more dangerous every day. Zexthul stood in the command center on New Harvest, watching displays that showed something he had never seen before. The Screet were retreating from the system, but not in defeat. They were regrouping for something much worse. Colonel Martinez pointed to a massive ship approaching from deep space. It was 10 times larger than anything the Screet had used before. Bioship Devastator class, she said. Our intelligence says it carries a planet-killer weapon. Planet killer? Zexthul felt cold despite the warm air in the command center. Biological weapon that turns everything organic into food for the Screet. Plants, animals, bacteria, everything. The planet becomes uninhabitable for centuries. That violates every galactic warfare convention. The Screet never signed those conventions. Zexthul watched the massive ship move, closer to New Harvest. How long until it's in range? 6 hours. Then you'll evacuate? Colonel Martinez looked at him strangely. Evacuate where? If we run, they'll just follow us to the next human colony, and the next one, and the next one. But surely some evacuation is better than total extinction, is it? We have 2 million civilians here. Maybe we could evacuate 50,000 before that thing arrives. What about the rest? At least some would survive. And spend the rest of their lives running from the Screet, always looking over their shoulders, always knowing that their friends and family died while they ran away. She turned back to the tactical display. No, we stay, we fight. We find a way to stop this thing. With what? You don't have weapons that can damage something that large. Not yet. Captain Chen entered the command center, followed by Dr. Kim and several other humans carrying equipment that sparked and hummed with energy. They looked excited instead of terrified. Report, Colonel Martinez ordered. We've been studying the planet-killer weapon, Dr. Kim said. It's based on modified Screet biotechnology, but much more advanced than anything we've seen before. Can we defend against it? Not defend, but we can do something better. Dr. Kim activated a holographic display that showed the biological weapon in detail. It was beautiful and terrifying, like a living crystal that pulsed with organic light. The weapon works by converting organic matter into Screet biomass, she explained, but the conversion process has a weakness. If we can introduce specific genetic modifications during the conversion, speak basic, Colonel Martinez interrupted. We can turn their own weapon against them. Zexthul felt sick. You're talking about using a planet-killer weapon? Not using it. Improving it. Captain Chen stepped forward. We've captured enough Screet biotechnology to understand how their collective consciousness works. Dr. Kim thinks we can modify their weapon to target that consciousness instead of just organic matter. That would damage the entire Screet species, Zexthul said. Yes. That's genocide. No, Colonel Martinez said firmly. Genocide is what they're trying to do to us. This is survival. Zexthul looked around the room. Every human present was calm, focused, determined. They were discussing the systematic crippling of an entire species as if it was a normal military operation. How can you even consider this? Dr. Kim answered without looking up from her work. Because they forced us to consider it. We didn't want this war. We didn't want to fight for our survival, but here we are. But to damage an entire species, the Screet collective consciousness is what makes them dangerous, Captain Chen explained. Individual Screet aren't aggressive, but when they're connected to the hive mind, they become predators. If we disrupt that connection, you turn them into something else. We turn them into something that won't try to eat our children. The plan they developed was beyond anything Zexthul thought possible. They would allow the Screet bioship to deploy its planet-killer weapon on New Harvest, but they would modify it during deployment, changing its target from organic matter to the specific neural patterns that enabled Screet collective consciousness. It required volunteers to stay on the planet during the deployment. Those volunteers would die when the weapon activated, but their sacrifice would spread the modified weapon throughout the Screet fleet. How many volunteers do you need? Colonel Martinez asked. 300, Dr. Kim said, positioned at specific locations around the planet. I'll take the primary position, Captain Chen said immediately. I'll take Sector 7, Colonel Martinez said. Wait, Zexthul interrupted. You're both senior officers. Surely you should evacuate and let others. No, Captain Chen said. Leaders don't ask people to do things they won't do themselves. Within 2 hours, they had more volunteers than they needed. Humans lined up to sacrifice themselves for a chance to stop the Screed permanently. They weren't dramatic about it. They didn't make speeches. They just signed up and began preparing their equipment. Zexthul watched a woman say goodbye to her children. She hugged them calmly and told them to be brave. She didn't cry. Her children didn't cry. They understood that this was necessary. How can you be so calm about dying? He asked her. I'm not dying for nothing, she replied. I'm dying so my children won't have to live in fear. That's not death, that's victory. The evacuation ships launched 4 hours later, carrying most of the colony's population to safety. But 300 humans remained, spread across the planet at positions Dr. Kim had calculated. They carried modified Screed biotechnology that would hijack the planet killer weapon. Zexthul was supposed to evacuate with the others, but he couldn't leave. He had to see how this ended. He had to understand what these humans were really capable of. The Screed bio ship entered orbit and began deployment. The planet killer weapon descended like a green rain, beautiful and terrible. Where it touched the ground, plants began changing, growing into new forms that pulsed with alien life. Weapon deployment confirmed, Dr. Kim reported from her position. Beginning modification sequence. Zexthul watched his scanner as the weapon spread across the planet. But instead of converting everything into Screed biomass, it was doing something else. The modifications Dr. Kim had designed were working. Modification successful, came Captain Chen's voice over the radio. Weapon retargeted. Broadcasting to Screed Fleet. The effect was immediate. Screed ships throughout the system began broadcasting distress signals. But these weren't normal distress calls. They were confused, panicked, desperate. What's happening to them? Zexthul asked. Dr. Kim's voice was weak but triumphant. We severed their connection to the collective consciousness. They're experiencing individual thought for the first time in millions of years. Are they dying? No, they're becoming individuals. They'll survive, but they'll never be able to form a hive mind again. Future generations will be born without the ability to connect collectively. Zexthul watched the Screed fleet scatter in all directions. Without their collective consciousness, they couldn't coordinate their actions. They couldn't think as one organism. They had become what they had always feared, alone. We did it, Captain Chen whispered over the radio. Those were her last words. One by one, the volunteer positions went silent. 300 humans died to ensure that the Screed would never again be able to threaten any species with collective extinction. Zexthul stood alone on the transformed planet, surrounded by alien growths that pulsed with modified Screed biotechnology. The air smelled different now, charged with energies he couldn't identify. He activated his recording device and tried to document what had happened, but every time he started to speak, he stopped. How could he describe a species that would sacrifice hundreds of its own members to protect future generations they would never meet? How could he explain humans to species that had never faced extinction? The evacuation ships returned 3 days later. They found Zexthul sitting by Captain Chen's position, still trying to write his report. The landscape around him had been transformed into something beautiful and strange. Organic technology that would serve as a memorial to the humans who had died there. Are you all right? Asked the rescue team leader. Zexthul looked up at him. Your people just changed the nature of an entire species to protect yourselves. How can you be so calm about it? Because it worked, the human replied. The Screed will never hunt anyone again. Our children are safe. That's what matters, but at such a cost, yes. War always has a cost. The question is whether you're willing to pay it. That night aboard the evacuation ship, Zexthul finally wrote his report. But as he read it back, he realized it sounded like science fiction. No species would believe that humans could modify a planet-killer weapon during deployment. No one would believe they could permanently alter another species' biology. No one would believe humans were this dangerous. But Zexthul had seen it with his own eyes. And he was beginning to understand that everything he had witnessed so far was just the beginning. Humans didn't just fight wars. They ended them permanently. Zexthul sat in his apartment on the Galactic Council station, staring at the recording device he had used for 23 years. 3 months had passed since he returned from the Kepler 442 system. 3 months of trying to write a report that no one would believe. The device held hundreds of hours of footage from the human war. Battles that violated every rule of civilized warfare, tactics that shouldn't work but did, soldiers who fought like they had already accepted death and found something beyond it. He had watched the recordings dozens of times. Each viewing made the humans seem more alien, more incomprehensible, more dangerous. Commander Vilana had been requesting his report for weeks. Today she would get it whether he was ready or not. The communication device chimed. Zexthul, please report to Briefing Room 7. He gathered his equipment and walked through the station corridors. Other species went about their daily business, unaware that somewhere in the galaxy humans were preparing for the next war. Because Zexthul had learned something during his final days with the Colonial Defense Forces. The Discrete conflict wasn't a war to humans. It was a training exercise. Commander Vilana waited in the briefing room with several other council officials. Representatives from 12 different species sat around the conference table. They all wanted to hear about human military capabilities. Zexthul, Commander Vilana said, "Thank you for joining us. We're eager to hear your assessment." He activated his recording device and looked around the table. These beings had fought wars for millions of years. They thought they understood conflict. They had no idea what was coming. The human species represents a fundamental change in the nature of galactic warfare, he began. They do not fight according to any established doctrine. All species develop unique tactic, and said Ambassador Krexthul of the Krexani. What makes humans special? Zexthul played a recording from New Harvest. It showed human soldiers modifying Discrete weapons during active combat. They adapt enemy technology in real time. This footage shows them learning to use captured equipment within minutes of acquiring it. Impressive, admitted General Morthak of the Zephyrian swarms, but not unprecedented. This is. Zexthul played footage of the final battle with the Discrete bioship. They modified a planet-killer weapon during deployment and used it to permanently alter the biology of an entire species. The room fell silent. Several representatives looked uncomfortable. That's impossible, said Dr. Velthara, the Council's chief scientist. No species has that level of biotechnological expertise. The humans didn't have it either. They developed it during the war. In a few months? In a few days. Ambassador Krexthul leaned forward. What are you suggesting? Zexthul activated another recording. It showed Captain Chen explaining human military philosophy. Humans don't fight to win battles. They fight to win wars. All wars forever. Explain. Every conflict teaches them something new about warfare. They study their enemies during combat and develop counters immediately. But more than that, they prepare for enemies they haven't met yet. He showed them footage of human engineers studying captured technology from 12 different species. This is from a human research facility. They're not just learning from the Discrete. They're preparing to fight everyone. That's paranoid thinking, said General Morthak. Is it? Let me show you something else. Zexthul played his final recording. It was from his last conversation with Colonel Martinez, 3 days before he left the system. Mr. Zexthul, her recorded voice said, you've been documenting our war for months. What do you think of human military capabilities? I think you're the most dangerous species I've ever encountered, his own voice replied. Good. That's what we want you to think. I don't understand. This whole conflict has been a test. We needed to know how other species would react to human warfare. You've been our study subject. The recording continued. The Discrete were perfect enemies for our purposes. Completely alien psychology, advanced biotechnology, numerical superiority. Fighting them taught us how to defeat hive minds, how to modify biological weapons, how to win against impossible odds. You're saying this was planned? Not planned. Prepared for. We knew we'd eventually encounter species like the Discrete, so when they attacked, we were ready to learn from the experience. The recording ended. The briefing room was completely silent. They used the war as a training exercise, Zexthul explained. The Discrete thought they were fighting for territory. The humans were preparing for the next threat. Ambassador Krexthul's voice was shaky. What next threat? Zexthul played one final clip. It showed human ships leaving the Kepler 442 system, carrying modified screet technology and detailed records of everything they had learned. "They're expanding," he said, "not for conquest, for preparation. They want to meet every species in the galaxy. They want to understand how we all fight. So they can defeat us," General Morthak said, "so they can protect themselves from us. Humans assume that every species they meet will eventually become an enemy, so they prepare to win against everyone." Dr. Velthera studied the recordings with growing alarm. Their technology advancement rate is unprecedented. If they continue learning at this pace, they'll surpass every species in the galaxy within decades. Zexthul finished. "Not through superior intelligence. Through superior preparation." Commander Velana looked around the table. "What do you recommend?" Zexthul had spent months thinking about this question. "I recommend we do nothing. Nothing. Any action we take against humans will teach them how to defeat us. Any alliance we offer will teach them our weaknesses. Any contact at all makes them stronger. Then we ignore them? We hope they ignore us." He stood up and gathered his equipment. "I've submitted my formal report to the Documentation Collective. It concludes that humans represent a new category of threat, not just to individual species, but to the existing galactic order." "What kind of threat?" Ambassador Krexthul asked. "The kind that makes every other species obsolete." Zexthul walked toward the door, then stopped. "There's one more thing. The humans I met asked me to deliver a message to the Galactic Council." "What message?" "Humanity is open to peaceful relations with all species, but they will defend themselves against any threat, using any means necessary. They suggest that other species consider this carefully before making contact." He left the briefing room and walked back to his apartment. That afternoon, he submitted his resignation to the Documentation Collective. He could no longer observe wars objectively because he now understood what war really was. War wasn't conflict between species. War was education, and humans were the fastest learners in the galaxy. Zexthul packed his personal belongings and booked passage to a remote world on the galactic rim. He wanted to be as far as possible from human space when they finished preparing for the next phase of their expansion, because he had seen their plans. Hidden in the background of dozens of recordings were glimpses of star charts, tactical discussions, research projects. Humans weren't just preparing to defend themselves. They were preparing to ensure no species could ever threaten them again. That meant becoming stronger than everyone else. Combined. As his ship left Council space, Zexthul looked back at the galaxy he had spent his career documenting. Somewhere out there, humans were studying the recordings he had made, learning from them, preparing for the day when they would meet the species he had just briefed. That day would come sooner than anyone expected. And when it did, Zexthul knew who would be ready. The humans had been preparing for that day since the moment they learned they weren't alone in the universe. His final report to the Council contained one last observation. Human warfare is not about winning battles or conquering territory. It is about ensuring the survival of humanity by making resistance impossible. They do not fight to defeat their enemies. They fight to remove the ability of their enemies to fight back. This is not conquest. This is evolution. And humans evolve faster than anyone else. The report was classified immediately. The Council decided that some information was too dangerous to share, but it was already too late. Humans had been monitoring Council communications for months. They knew exactly what effect their demonstration had achieved, and they were pleased. Phase 1 was complete. Contact had been established. Galactic capabilities had been assessed. Human advantages had been confirmed. Phase 2 could begin. Somewhere in human space, ships were launching toward new star systems. Not for conquest, but for preparation, because humans had learned that the galaxy was full of potential threats, and they intended to be ready for all of them.